My name is Pastor David Mitchell. I'm 28 years old, and 3 months ago I accepted the biggest challenge of my life, taking over Riverside Baptist Church in Cedar Falls, a small town in rural Tennessee. What should have been a fresh start turned into the most disturbing mystery I've ever faced. It all began when I decided to renovate the main altar. The church, built in 1960, had never undergone a complete renovation. The wooden walls were rotting, the oak floors creaking, and there was a persistent smell of mold that had bothered the congregation for decades. "Pastor David, are you sure about this renovation?" asked Mrs. Betty Lou Harrison, the church secretary for over 40 years, with that slow southern drawl and suspicious look I'd come to know well. "Father Matthew always said some things were better left as they were." Father Matthew. Always Father Matthew. Since I arrived, that's all I heard. Matthew O'Sullivan had been the parish priest for 25 years, until he mysteriously disappeared in 1983. The official story was that he'd suffered a nervous breakdown and moved to a monastery in another state, cutting contact with everyone. But something about that story never convinced me. "Mrs. Harrison, we need to modernize this church. Young folks need to feel welcomed, and this mold is affecting everyone's health." She sighed, shaking her head with that expression that seemed to say, "You Yankees just don't understand. I just hope you know what you're doing, Pastor." On Monday, March 15th, construction began. I hired Billy Ray Thompson, a trusted local contractor, and his small crew. When they started breaking up the altar stones, they found a strange cavity. "Pastor, you need to come see this," Billy Ray called out, his voice tense, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by something darker. "There's something real strange under this altar." When I approached, I felt a chill run down my spine. There, in a small underground chamber, were partially mummified human remains. Next to the bones, a deteriorating black cassock and a silver crucifix I immediately recognized from old church photos. "Sweet Jesus," I whispered, making the sign of the cross. "It's Father Matthew." Billy Ray stepped back, his face pale as moonlight. "Pastor, this ain't right. People don't just disappear and show up under altars. Somebody put him here." In that moment, I knew I'd stumbled onto something much bigger than a simple renovation. Father Matthew hadn't fled to any monastery. He'd been murdered and buried in the most sacred place of the church he'd loved so dearly. But why? And by whom? I called the police immediately, but Sheriff Tom Carvalho, a man in his 60s with a weathered face and suspicious eyes, seemed more interested in covering up the case than investigating it. "Look here, Pastor, this is a small town. Things from 40 years ago are better left buried. Father Matthew was already forgotten, no need to stir up the past." "Forgotten?" I shot back. "A man was murdered and buried in a church. How can I pretend nothing happened? Murder's a strong word. Could have been an accident, natural death, who knows? Point is, digging this up won't bring nobody back, and it'll just cause trouble for good folks who've moved on with their lives." Something in his tone made my blood run cold. The way he avoided eye contact, the nervous twitch in his jaw. Sheriff Carvalho knew more than he was letting on. I decided to investigate on my own. That evening, I visited Magnolia Manor, the local nursing home, hoping to find someone who remembered Father Matthew well. That's where I met Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield, 89 years old, sharp as a tack despite her age. "Father Matthew," she said, her eyes lighting up with memory. "Now there was a good man. Too good for his own good, if you asked me." "What do you mean, Mrs. Whitfield?" She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He was asking too many questions about the church finances. Said something wasn't adding up with the building fund. This was right before he disappeared." My heart raced. "Building fund? Oh yes, dear. The church had raised nearly $200,000 to build a new fellowship hall. But Father Matthew started noticing discrepancies in the books. He told me he was going to confront the church board about it. Do you remember who was on the board back then?" Her face darkened. "Same folks who run everything in this town. The Harrisons, the Morgans, the Kellys. Old money families who've been here since before the Civil War. They don't take kindly to outsiders asking questions. As I drove home that night through the winding country roads, past cotton fields and old plantation houses, I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. In my rearview mirror, I noticed the same set of headlights that had been following me since I left the nursing home. Back at the parsonage, I found my front door slightly ajar. My blood froze. I was certain I'd locked it. Inside, my study had been ransacked, papers scattered, drawers pulled out, my computer missing. On my desk, written in red ink on church letterhead, was a simple message. Some graves should stay closed. The next morning, I tried to access the church's financial records from 1983, but Mrs. Harrison claimed they'd been lost in a flood years ago. When I suggested we could request copies from the bank, she suddenly developed a migraine and went home early. At the local diner May's Country Kitchen, conversation stopped when I walked in. People who'd been friendly just days before now avoided eye contact. The waitress, a young woman named Savannah, nervously served my coffee and whispered, "Pastor, maybe you should let sleeping dogs lie. This town has a long memory." That afternoon, I received a visit from 3 men in expensive suits completely out of place in our small farming community. They introduced themselves as concerned citizens, but wouldn't give their names. "Pastor Mitchell," the tallest one said, his voice smooth as bourbon but with an underlying threat. "We hear you've been asking questions about ancient history. That's not why the church board hired you. Actually, I wasn't hired by any board. I was assigned by the Southern Baptist Convention." The man's smile never wavered, but his eyes went cold. "Well then, perhaps the convention would be interested to know about certain irregularities in your background check. Wouldn't want any scandals, would we?" After they left, I called my mentor, Dr. James Patterson, back at the seminary. "David, what have you gotten yourself into?" he asked after I explained the situation. "I don't know, but I can't just ignore this. A man was murdered. Be careful, son. Small southern towns can be protective of their secrets. Some of these families have been covering up scandals since Reconstruction." That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old parsonage seemed amplified, every shadow suspicious. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps on the front porch. Peering through the curtains, I saw a figure in dark clothing placing something by the door. When I was sure they were gone, I opened the door to find a manila envelope. Inside were photocopies of old bank statements and a note in shaky handwriting. "The truth is in the numbers. Trust no one from the founding families. A friend." The bank statements showed regular transfers from the church building fund to a private account owned by Cedar Falls Development LLC. Over 6 months in 1983, nearly $180,000 had been siphoned away. I cross-referenced the LLC with county records at the courthouse. The company was owned by 3 partners, Harrison, Morgan, and Kelly, the same families Mrs. Whitfield had mentioned. The same families who still controlled everything in Cedar Falls. Father Matthew hadn't just discovered theft, he'd uncovered a conspiracy involving the town's most powerful families. And it had cost him his life. Armed with the bank statements, I decided to confront someone who might crack under pressure. I chose Rebecca Kelly Morgan, the 50-year-old daughter of 2 founding families who now ran the town council. She lived in the biggest house on Magnolia Street, a restored antebellum mansion that screamed old money. "Mrs. Kelly Morgan, I need to ask you about the church building fund from 1983. Her composure slipped for just a moment, enough to confirm my suspicions. "I don't know what you're talking about, Pastor. I have bank records showing transfers to Cedar Falls Development, your family's company." She stared at me for a long moment, then surprisingly, began to laugh, but it was bitter, hollow. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Coming down here from up north, thinking you can waltz in and solve mysteries. I'm from Kentucky, ma'am. Same difference." She poured herself a glass of something stronger than sweet tea. "You want to know about Father Matthew? Fine. But you won't like what you hear." She led me to an ornate sitting room filled with family portraits dating back generations. My daddy, God rest his soul, wasn't a bad man. None of them were. But 1983 was a hard year. The cotton mill closed, half the town was out of work, families were losing their farms. So you stole from the church? We borrowed from the church, she snapped. We were going to pay it back. The development company was going to bring in new businesses, create jobs. We were trying to save this town. But Father Matthew found out. Her face crumpled. Matthew was idealistic. He didn't understand the complexities of keeping a community alive. When he threatened to expose everything, to call in the authorities. She took a shaky sip of her drink. The men panicked. Your father killed him? Not my daddy. He was too gentle for that. But Harold Harrison. Harold had been in Vietnam. He knew how to handle problems. My stomach turned. You've all been living with this secret for 40 years? It was supposed to stay buried forever. We moved the money around, created paper trails, made it look like legitimate loans. The fellowship hall got built eventually, just differently funded. The town survived, thrived even. Wasn't that worth one man's life? You're talking about murder as if it were a business decision. She stood up abruptly, walking to the window that overlooked the church steeple in the distance. Harold's been dead for 10 years. My daddy died 5 years ago, eaten up by guilt. The only ones left who know the whole truth are me, Mrs. Harrison, and Judge Morgan. And now me. She turned, her eyes filled with tears but also something harder, desperation. Pastor, I'm begging you. This will destroy families, destroy the town. The money's long gone, spent on keeping Cedar Falls alive. Can't you just rebury the bones and move on? Mrs. Kelly Morgan, I took an oath before God. I can't pretend I didn't find a murdered man under my altar. That's when I heard the distinctive sound of a shotgun being cocked behind me. I'm afraid I can't let you leave here, Pastor. Came the voice of Harold Harrison Jr., Mrs. Harrison's son, standing in the doorway with a hunting rifle pointed at my chest. Harold, what are you doing? Rebecca gasped. What should have been done weeks ago? Harold snarled, his eyes wild with desperation. You think I'm gonna let this outsider destroy everything our family's built? Everything my daddy died protecting? Your father died of cancer, Harold. He died of shame. Guilt ate him alive for 40 years. And now this preacher wants to drag it all out for what? Justice? There ain't no justice in destroying good people's lives for something that happened before most folks were even born. I raised my hands slowly, trying to stay calm. Harold, put the gun down. We can work this out. Oh, we're gonna work it out all right. Same way we worked it out with Father Matthew. You killed him? Harold's face twisted with rage and pain. I was 18 years old. I didn't want to hurt nobody, but Daddy said we didn't have a choice. Matthew was gonna ruin everything, send good men to prison, destroy families. So you murdered a priest. We didn't mean to kill him. Harold shouted, the rifle shaking in his hands. Daddy and Mr. Kelly and Mr. Morgan, they just wanted to scare him, make him understand. But Matthew fought back, started yelling about calling the FBI. In the struggle, he fell and hit his head on the church steps. Rebecca was crying now. Harold, stop. Just stop. But Harold was lost in the memory, tears streaming down his weathered face. We panicked. Daddy said we had to make it look like he left town. We moved the body into the church, dug out that cavity under the altar. Figured nobody would ever think to look there. And you've been living with this secret ever since. Every damn day for 40 years. You think it's been easy? Watching Mama age herself sick with worry, watching the other families fall apart from guilt. I saw my chance as his grip on the rifle loosened. Harold, it doesn't have to end this way. Turn yourself in. Tell the truth. It's time to stop running from what happened. Turn myself in? He laughed bitterly. I'm 58 years old with grandkids who think I'm a hero. You want me to spend my last years in prison for something that happened when I was barely a man? I want you to find peace. Peace? His voice rose to a shout. There ain't no peace in this. Don't you understand? If this comes out, it won't just be me going down. The whole town's built on the foundation of that lie. The businesses we started with that money, the jobs we created, the families we saved from poverty, all of it will crumble. That's when I heard the sirens in the distance, getting closer. Harold heard them too. His face went white. You called the cops? I didn't, but someone did. Through the window, I could see Sheriff Carvalho's car pulling up, followed by 2 state police vehicles. Behind them, news vans were already arriving. Somehow word had gotten out. Harold, it's over, Rebecca said softly. Let it be over. But Harold raised the rifle again, pointing it at my head. No. No, I won't let it end like this. Not with my granddaughter starting college next year, not with my son's construction business just getting off the ground. The front door burst open. Drop your weapon, came the shout of a state trooper. In the chaos that followed shouting, radio chatter, Rebecca screaming, I threw myself behind the antique sofa. Harold, cornered and desperate, made the last terrible decision of his life. The single gunshot echoed through the mansion like thunder. Harold Harrison Jr. didn't die immediately. The self-inflicted wound to his chest gave him just enough time to confess everything to the state police investigators. His final words were reported to be, "Tell my family I'm sorry. Tell them Daddy made me promise to protect the secret, but secrets ain't worth dying for." Within 24 hours, Cedar Falls was swarming with FBI agents, forensic teams, and news crews from Atlanta, Nashville, and Memphis. The story of the murdered priest hidden under the altar for 40 years made national headlines. Small town's dark secret, the body in the Baptist church, murder in the Bible Belt. Rebecca Kelly Morgan and Mrs. Betty Lou Harrison were arrested as accessories after the fact. Judge Walter Morgan, 79 years old and in declining health, turned himself in at the county courthouse, confessing his role in the cover-up. The forensic examination of Father Matthew's remains confirmed Harold's story. The priest had died from blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with falling and striking the church steps. What started as an intimidation attempt had escalated into manslaughter, then into 4 decades of cover-up involving some of the South's most respected families. The financial investigation revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. The stolen $180,000, adjusted for inflation, would be worth over $500,000 today. Cedar Falls Development LLC had indeed used the money to revitalize the town, but through illegal means that had compromised everyone involved. During the trials, more secrets emerged. Father Matthew hadn't been the only obstacle the conspirators had faced. 2 other people who'd asked uncomfortable questions over the years had died in suspicious accidents. A church treasurer in 1987 and a local reporter in 1995. While these deaths couldn't be definitively linked to the conspiracy, they cast a dark shadow over Cedar Falls' recent history. The national media attention was devastating for the small town. Tourism, which had been a growing source of income due to Cedar Falls' antebellum architecture and southern charm, evaporated overnight. Property values plummeted. The bank, partially owned by the implicated families, faced federal investigation. But perhaps the most profound impact was on the faith community. Riverside Baptist Church became the center of a media circus, with reporters camping outside during services, interviewing parishioners about their feelings of betrayal and loss. Many congregants left for other churches. Some lost their faith entirely, unable to reconcile how such evil could have been hidden in their sacred space for so long. Others, however, found their faith strengthened by witnessing truth finally triumph over decades of lies. 6 months after the discovery, I stood before a much smaller congregation in our rebuilt church. The altar had been completely reconstructed, the cavity filled and consecrated with prayers for Father Matthew's soul. A memorial plaque now honored his memory and his commitment to truth and justice. My friends, I began that Sunday morning, looking out at faces that showed the weariness of a community that had been forced to confront its darkest secrets. We've walked through the valley of the shadow of death these past months. We've seen how sin, left unchecked, can corrupt even the most sacred spaces. Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield, now 90, sat in the front row with tears in her eyes. She'd become something of a local hero for providing the crucial information that helped solve the case. Beside her sat Savannah, the young waitress from Mays, who'd revealed she was the one who left the bank statements on my doorstep. Her grandfather had been Father Matthew's assistant and had hidden the evidence for decades, too afraid to come forward. But we've also seen the power of truth to set us free. Father Matthew's voice, silenced for 40 years, has finally been heard. His death was not in vain if we learn from it, if we commit to never again letting fear overcome our duty to do what's right. The church was only half full, but those who remained were there by choice, committed to rebuilding not just the building but the community's moral foundation. We'd started a scholarship fund in Father Matthew's name for young people pursuing social justice careers. We'd also begun a reconciliation process, reaching out to the families of the accused, helping them deal with their shame and find healing. Rebecca Kelly Morgan had been sentenced to 5 years probation and community service. From her jail cell before sentencing, she'd written a letter that I read to the congregation. To the people of Cedar Falls and Riverside Baptist Church, I cannot undo the pain my family's actions have caused. I cannot bring back Father Matthew or give you back the innocence we stole from your community. But I can promise to spend the rest of my life making amends. The Kelly and Morgan families will establish a foundation to support whistleblowers and truth-tellers, people like Father Matthew who have the courage to stand up to corruption, even when it costs them everything. As I concluded my sermon that morning, I noticed something I hadn't seen in months. People were crying, but they were also smiling. There was hope in their faces, a sense that truth, however painful, was better than living with lies. After the service, an elderly man approached me, someone I'd never seen before. He introduced himself as Father Michael O'Sullivan, Matthew's younger brother, who'd driven down from Chicago after hearing about the case. "Pastor Mitchell," he said, his Irish accent still strong after decades in America. "I want to thank you. My family has wondered for 40 years what happened to Matthew. We always knew he wouldn't have just abandoned his calling. He was too devoted to his faith, too committed to justice. He was a good man, Father O'Sullivan. His death meant something. It did. And so does your courage in bringing the truth to light." Matthew would be proud. As I watched Father O'Sullivan kneel at the memorial plaque, whispering what I assumed was a prayer in Gaelic, I realized that this case had changed me forever. I'd come to Cedar Falls as a young pastor eager to build a successful ministry. Instead, I'd learned that sometimes the most important sermon you can preach is simply refusing to let evil hide in the shadows. The church was smaller now, the town wounded, the future uncertain. But there was something clean about the air in Cedar Falls now, something honest about the way people looked each other in the eye. The truth had set us free, just as the scripture promised. And in the end, that was Father Matthew O'Sullivan's greatest miracle, not healing the sick or performing wonders, but showing us that some things are worth dying for: truth, justice, and the courage to stand against corruption, no matter how powerful or how well hidden it might be. The bones had been laid to rest in the church cemetery with full honors, but Father Matthew's spirit, his unwavering commitment to what was right, lived on in every person who chose truth over comfort, justice over peace, courage over silence. That, I realized, was the real miracle. And it was more than enough.